If you've spent time in Christian or faith-based spaces, chances are you've heard of Dr. Michael Brown. He's a well-known apologist, author, and public speaker, celebrated for his bold defense of biblical truth and his willingness to engage in controversial conversations. For years, Dr. Brown has held a respected position in evangelical and charismatic circles, admired for his intellect, passion, and perceived moral clarity. But in recent years, that image has started to crack.
I am very much aware of the fact that in the body now there's kind of like a mini civil war over me. Some of you are really for me. Some of you are really against me. I want to make an appeal to you. Please don't divide over me. Unite around Jesus instead. Please don't lose friendships, relationships, ministry partnerships over me.
Allegations of inappropriate conduct have emerged. Serious, deeply personal accusations from multiple women, calling into question not only Dr. Brown's behavior, but the wider issue of accountability in spiritual leadership. These aren't just rumors or social media chatter. These are detailed claims backed by personal testimonies, documentation, and an independent investigation. The story is messy. It's not simple or clear-cut, but it's deeply important. Because this isn't just about one man. It's about power, trust, spiritual influence. And what happens when those things are misused behind closed doors? A public figure? A private pattern? For decades, Dr. Michael Brown built a platform on truth and integrity. His books, sermons, and radio broadcasts gained him a large following. He wasn't afraid to challenge secular culture or address sin within the church. He positioned himself as a moral compass in uncertain times, someone his audience could trust. That's what makes the recent allegations so unsettling. The first woman to come forward publicly is Sarah Monk, a former assistant who worked closely with Dr. Brown. According to Sarah, what began as a spiritual mentorship slowly became something else, something manipulative and, at times, physical. She describes instances of hand-holding, kisses on the forehead, and multiple occasions where Dr. Brown smacked her on the butt. While not overtly sexual, she says the behavior felt invasive and inappropriate, especially given the power dynamic between them. Perhaps most striking were their late-night meetings, including one at a Walmart, well outside professional hours. Sarah says these interactions were often framed as spirit-led moments, which made it harder to question or refuse them, without feeling like she was disobeying God or dishonoring her mentor. Over time, Sarah says she felt confused, ashamed, and spiritually manipulated. When she finally spoke out, she provided documentation and messages to back her story, later participating in an independent investigation that flagged concerns about boundary violations and emotional control. But Sarah's story isn't the only one. Another woman, we'll call her Kim, tells a more emotionally complex story. Kim was married when she began receiving mentorship from Dr. Brown. What started as spiritual guidance turned into something deeply personal. She describes long emotional phone calls, increasingly intimate email exchanges, and language that blurred the line between spiritual affection and romantic desire. Eventually, she says, their communication became erotic in tone, suggestive, emotionally loaded, and completely inappropriate for a ministry relationship. Like Sarah, Kim says she felt trapped. Challenging Dr. Brown meant challenging a man she'd been taught to see as a spiritual authority, and potentially putting her reputation, marriage, and church relationships at risk. Kim eventually cut off contact and shared her story with a small circle of trusted leaders. She, too, provided evidence to investigators, hoping to prevent others from going through the same experience. What's disturbing about these accounts is the consistency in how boundaries were allegedly crossed. Emotional intimacy disguised as mentorship, spiritual language used to justify questionable behavior, in private encounters that left women feeling confused and powerless. Neither Sarah nor Kim claim that Dr. Brown's behavior escalated to overt sexual abuse, but both describe a steady erosion of emotional and spiritual boundaries, a type of manipulation that can be just as damaging. And it's a pattern seen in other high-profile Christian scandals. Charismatic leaders, often lacking formal accountability, cultivate deep emotional bonds with followers who then become vulnerable to exploitation, all under the guise of spiritual connection. Dr. Brown has denied any wrongdoing. In public statements, he has acknowledged the relationships, but insists they've been misinterpreted. He says any behavior that caused discomfort was unintentional and has expressed sorrow if anyone was hurt. But critics argue that intent isn't the only issue. When someone with influence blurs lines, even unintentionally, the impact is real. And in spiritual contexts, that impact can be devastating. The bigger question, who holds leaders accountable?
We now know after the investigation that it was a verbal, a textual email, and then a phone erotic relationship that progressed over many months until it got to a place that was quite unclean. And according to Ray, the husband, that included Mike pressuring this woman, Kim, into not sleeping with her own husband, which shows a desire for possession. You know, you're mine. You don't belong to him. You belong to me.
That is a direct assault upon the marriage.
Yes. And he pressured Kim to meet him in a public place. When I say public, I mean outside the home.
One of the most troubling aspects of this story is the lack of oversight. Like many independent Christian leaders, Dr. Brown doesn't operate under a traditional church board or denomination. He leads his own ministry, answers to his own team, and controls much of his public narrative. That kind of structure, or lack thereof, can create the perfect environment for misconduct to go unchecked. Who challenges the leader when something feels off? Who protects staff, volunteers, or congregants when lines are crossed? And when someone finally speaks up, will they be believed? For many survivors of spiritual abuse, the answer has too often been silence, shame, or outright retaliation. Both Sarah and Kim say they feared coming forward, not only because of Dr. Brown's influence, but because of how the church tends to handle these situations. Too often, women are accused of exaggerating, lying, or trying to destroy a man of God. But they came forward anyway, not out of vengeance, but out of conviction. "I'm not here to ruin his life," Sarah said. "I just don't want anyone else to go through what I did." Kim echoed that. "I believe in grace, but grace doesn't mean ignoring patterns of harm. It means truth, healing, and accountability. Where do we go from here? As of now, no legal action has been taken. No formal discipline has been announced. But the testimonies continue to raise questions, not just about Dr. Brown, but about the broader Christian culture that often places leaders on pedestals and leaves little room for accountability. Spiritual abuse isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle, gradual, quiet, but that doesn't make it less damaging. These women's stories should be a wake-up call, not just to fans or followers of Dr. Brown, but to every faith community that has entrusted someone with spiritual authority. Because when trust is broken, it doesn't just damage reputations, it wounds people. And if the church truly cares about truth, it must be willing to confront it, even when it's uncomfortable. This is heavy, but here's where it really starts to get interesting and troubling. These alleged incidents involving Dr. Michael Brown, they didn't just happen recently. In fact, most of them go back years. So why are they surfacing now? That's the question many have been asking. It turns out the turning point came in 2019, around the same time Dr. Brown publicly weighed in on the scandal involving another well-known Christian figure, Todd Bentley. You may remember that situation: serious accusations, an outcry for accountability, and the broader church community grappling with what to do when leaders fall short. As Dr. Brown spoke out against Bentley, something shifted. Former students from Dr. Brown's own ministry school, Fire School of Ministry, began reflecting more critically on their past experiences. Some started coming forward, sharing personal stories, and raising concerns about Dr. Brown's behavior and leadership over the years. That's when the picture really started to take shape, and it wasn't pretty. An independent investigation begins. In response to these concerns, an independent investigation was launched by Firefly Investigations, led by James Holla Jr. Their task? To dig into allegations that included abuse, grooming, manipulation, deception, coercion, anything that could suggest a pattern of misconduct, especially involving a power imbalance between Dr. Brown and women under his spiritual care. According to Firefly, Brown's ministry, the Line of Fire, agreed to cooperate fully. No restrictions were put in place. Investigators said they were given access to everything they requested, with Brown himself publicly committing to transparency. At first, it looked like this would be a model of integrity, but when the final report was completed in April 2025, things took a sharp turn. The report is in, and the rewriting begins. Despite Dr. Brown's public commitment to full cooperation, his Elder Accountability Board, the group tasked with holding him responsible, rejected and altered parts of the final report. One of the most critical findings from Firefly was this. For over 25 years, Dr. Brown had allegedly deflected and avoided questions about misconduct, choosing damage control over honesty. The investigators described it as a calculated effort to protect his reputation and ministry. But Brown's board didn't like that. They rewrote the section entirely, issuing their own statement claiming that Brown had always been honest and remorseful whenever these matters were raised. That's not just a minor edit. That's a fundamental reframing. And it didn't stop there. Firefly characterized the core issue as sexually abusive misconduct, pointing to the way Dr. Brown allegedly used his spiritual authority to cross boundaries and create unhealthy, even exploitative, relationships with young women. But the board softened that language too, replacing it with the more generic term, leadership misconduct. That subtle change, critics argue, wasn't about accuracy. It was about optics. It reframed a potentially disqualifying abuse of power as something more manageable, something Brown could recover from without causing a major disruption to his ministry. Damage control masquerading as accountability. So what does this tell us? Despite appearances, when the investigation started to confirm the very behaviors people feared, those responsible for enforcing accountability stepped back. Instead of owning the findings, they rewrote them, not based on new evidence, but seemingly based on a desire to protect Dr. Brown. It's a classic case of selective accountability. As long as the investigation stayed comfortable, everyone played along. But the moment the truth began to challenge the narrative, the system protected the leader, not the people hurt by him. It sends a clear message. Accountability only goes as far as it's convenient. A broader pattern. But the implications go far beyond these two publicly known cases. As more former students and staff have begun to speak, what's emerging isn't just a few isolated incidents. It's a culture that enabled unhealthy dynamics to flourish unchecked for years. Take Fire School of Ministry, for example. It was positioned as a serious, spiritually rigorous training institute. Students were expected to live by strict purity codes. Some were even expelled for watching R-rated movies or dancing. The environment was intense, legalistic, and highly controlled. Yet many now claim that while students were being punished for minor infractions, Dr. Brown operated by a different standard entirely. Former students, especially women, have described Dr. Brown as a spiritual father figure. At first, he seemed to embrace that language, often referring to a father-daughter dynamic. But when pressure mounted, he began distancing himself from the idea. Still, for those who lived through it, the power imbalance was clear and damaging. One woman recalled how Dr. Brown would sign off emails with "Love, Dad," even though she was a student, not family. Others spoke of being invited to his home on ministry trips, or even into hotel rooms. One woman said her involvement with him crossed every professional and ethical boundary, and that she felt emotionally tangled in a relationship that blurred spiritual intimacy with control. The hypocrisy at the heart of it. Perhaps the most jarring revelation involves Dr. Brown's personal behavior compared to the rules he enforced. While Fire School students were being disciplined for things like watching movies, Dr. Brown was allegedly in his office watching footage from Woodstock, including scenes with topless women alongside students. Multiple women recalled instances where Brown would wrap his arm around them, pull them close, and create a physically intimate atmosphere that felt far from appropriate, especially given the strict moral code he demanded from his students. It's the kind of double standard that strikes at the heart of spiritual hypocrisy, and it raises a painful but necessary question. How often does spiritual authority get used not for care, but for control? Final thoughts. The investigation into Dr. Michael Brown was supposed to be a test of transparency and accountability. Instead, it became a case study in damage control, how even well-intentioned processes can be manipulated when the truth becomes inconvenient. Yes, these are serious claims. Yes, they require careful examination. But the instinct to protect the platform over the people is what allows these environments to persist. The takeaway? Real accountability requires more than words. It requires action, even when it's costly. And until the church is willing to face that truth head-on, stories like this won't be the exception. They'll keep happening, behind more closed doors, under more respected names. When accountability becomes control, the final layer of the Dr. Michael Brown story. And then there's the massage table. Yeah, according to one witness, a massage table was set up in Dr. Michael Brown's office. And on that table, Sarah Monk. Let that sit for a moment. For a man running a ministry school with strict purity rules, where students could be penalized for watching movies or dancing, this kind of behavior reveals a massive disconnect between what was preached and what was practiced. And honestly, how much more do we need to see before we stop calling this misunderstanding and start calling it what it is? This isn't just about two isolated incidents. This isn't just about Sarah or Kim. What's being uncovered here is a system, a culture, where boundaries were blurred, power was misused, and truth was buried under layers of manipulation and control. It's bigger than Dr. Brown. It's about the environment he created and the leadership structures that allowed it to flourish unchecked. Transparency versus information control. From the start, Dr. Brown claimed he welcomed an independent investigation. He promised transparency. He said he wanted truth to come out. But the deeper you look, the more clear it becomes that this wasn't about transparency. It was about controlling the narrative. For years, even key leaders, like Stephen Ott and Robert Gladstone, men who were supposed to be part of Dr. Brown's accountability structure, weren't given the full story. They were kept in the dark about the seriousness of the allegations until much later. That's not transparency. That's strategic silence. It didn't start recently either. Back in 2003, a woman named Londa Parker confronted Dr. Brown and his wife over what she believed were inappropriate behaviors, hand-holding, back-rubbing, and blurred boundaries with young female students. So what did Dr. Brown do? He denied everything and then flipped the script, accusing her of lacking the fruit of the Spirit for questioning him. That's a classic tactic. Turn the concern back onto the accuser. If you challenge the leader, suddenly you're the one in the wrong. It's spiritual gaslighting, and it worked. For years. This wasn't an isolated moment. It was part of a decades-long pattern of deflecting, minimizing, and spiritually shaming those who raised red flags. Fast forward to December 2024, and the pattern continues. Dr. Brown allegedly jumped on a video call with missionaries. After the investigation was complete, after the public already knew what had happened. And what did he say? He told them not to share anything publicly, calling it a betrayal of confidence before God. Think about that. He framed silence, not accountability, as the righteous choice. It fits perfectly with a long-standing strategy of managing appearances, keeping things quiet, and preserving influence at all costs. The Firefly Report. Clear findings, strategic edits. Now let's talk about the Firefly Report, the independent investigation that was meant to get to the bottom of all of this. Firefly investigations didn't pull punches. They found that Dr. Brown engaged in an inappropriate relationship with Kim, and with Sarah, they used the words sexually abusive misconduct, language that clearly points to a violation of trust, power, and personal boundaries. They acknowledged that intent can be difficult to prove, but the impact was undeniable. Sarah herself described feeling deeply uncomfortable, manipulated, and harmed by the nature of their interactions. That's harassment, full stop. But here's what happened next. Dr. Brown's Elder Accountability Board, the very people meant to enforce consequences and ensure justice, revised the report. They took the term sexually abusive misconduct and swapped it for leadership misconduct. Why? Because one sounds criminal or disqualifying. The other sounds like a bad management decision. That change wasn't just semantic, it was strategic. It allowed them to present Dr. Brown as someone who made a mistake, not someone who abused power. And what followed? A soft landing, A few recommendations: a path cleared for Dr. Brown to return to ministry, image mostly intact. This is what people mean when they say systems protect themselves. When institutions face uncomfortable truths, they too often default to damage control instead of accountability. It's about power. At the heart of this entire story is one word: power. When someone holds spiritual authority, especially over young, impressionable students, everything gets blurry. Respect becomes loyalty. Mentorship becomes emotional dependence. Boundaries, once clear, become negotiable. And when things go wrong, the very person entrusted to guide others becomes the one causing harm. That's what happened here. It's not just the actions, it's the manipulation, the minimization, and the rewriting of the narrative to protect the man at the top. The public messaging didn't reflect repentance. It reflected control. And as more allegations surfaced, as more stories came forward, the question kept coming back. Who's really being protected? Because it sure wasn't the women. The bigger system. This story is about more than Dr. Michael Brown. It's about the structures that failed to hold leaders accountable, especially in independent ministries with no outside oversight. It's about how easily leaders can reframe misconduct as mentorship, and how often survivors are made to feel like they're the ones in the wrong for speaking up. It's about purity culture rules being applied rigidly to students while the leader behaves however he wants behind closed doors. It's about the silence, the gaslighting, and the fear of being labeled rebellious or divisive if you dare to question someone in spiritual authority. This entire situation raises painful but necessary questions. How do we define spiritual abuse? Can there be real accountability without external oversight? What happens when the people responsible for justice are more interested in protecting platforms than people? Final thoughts. Look, reputations can fall fast when allegations come to light. But what's even more revealing is what happens after. The spin, the cover-up, the reframing. The Dr. Brown case forces us to reckon with what we really believe about accountability in Christian spaces. Because if leaders can rewrite their own investigations, if boards can swap out abuse for leadership failure, if people are silenced in the name of unity, then maybe it's not just the leaders we need to question. Maybe it's the entire system that enables them. So here's the real question. What do you believe about spiritual authority now? And who's protecting the people when the powerful go unchecked?